Hi, everybody, and welcome to Ancestry Roads. We're going to talk planting by the signs, but first, I want to give you a quote. So, Wendell Berry, a very famous poet, came out and said, the earth is all that we have in common. And as we talk about the earth today, we're going to talk about folklore and Ember Days with Rosann from Moon and Mountain Lore. See you in a bit. Welcome back, Rosann.
Thanks, Sandy. It's good to be here.
This is a really exciting broadcast for me today because when I first saw you put the title Ember Days for the February 2024 Planning by the Signs webcast, I knew a little bit about it, but it's really deep in religion and really deep in folklore. And sometimes those two things go together and sometimes they don't. So I am thrilled to have you here to tell us, what is Ember Days?
Andy, I don't know what an Ember Day is. This is one thing, like I said on our introductory podcast, I learned from my neighbors in North Georgia. And if my neighbors said it, I did it. And I didn't know to ask about Ember Days. Of course, I saw it on the agricultural calendar.
And let's bring that up real quick, too.
Yeah. Every few months I'd see it and I would just kind of not think about that today. So I didn't know to ask anybody. But what is really fascinating is how different parts of Appalachia can interpret this folklore differently. And a Facebook friend, his name is Phil Case, a shout out for his Facebook page, Planning by the Signs. He's in Kentucky, and he learned like I did from an elderly friend a long time ago. And what he said about Ember Days, when people say, well, what are they and why shouldn't I plan on them? And he said, well, my friend and mentor told me not to plan on them, and he planted religiously by the signs.
Oh, listen to that.
Okay. So I don't plant by them.
That was pretty clever. You got the religion and the folklore in one sentence.
Yes. And he said he has tried to look for reasons. The one that he says, and the one that I also say, is that it was traditionally holy days, days for fasting and prayer that were set aside 4 times a year, quarterly Ember Days. Why we weren't supposed to plant on them, I'm not quite sure. The thing is, you can't Google this stuff.
You can't. It's within our culture. This is a show based on Appalachians, and it is in our culture. It's passed down, and a lot of stories about coal miners are passed down. Well, guess what? A lot of stories about planting. The only way we know this is passed down because a lot of us had to help do it, and we learned that way, or we were told, hey, don't do that. You can't do that then. So I'm glad you mentioned that. If you go and you try and buy an encyclopedia book called Planting by the Signs, let us know if you find it.
Yeah, please do. The closest thing I can find to that I feel that is authentic, meaning written out of someone's folklore knowledge, either themselves or that they got it from those who practice it, is the Foxfire book. The very first Foxfire book has a very long article about planting by the signs. That's not to say you can't Google planting by the signs. You can get things coming from biodynamics and permaculture, different groups of people who practice this, but it is not the same as what Appalachia does. We don't use words like root days or flower days, and we don't worry about descending moon, ascending moon. In fact, we use a completely different calendar to plant by, a tropical instead of sidereal calendar. And I know that's getting deep in astrology, but there is a difference. So, and so if anybody out there plants by the signs, please let me know what you think about Ember Days. I pay attention to Ember Days now because Phil said to pay attention to them. but I also pay attention to what is the sign that they're falling on. Like this time, and on February the not January. Let me flip over. On February the 21st, the first Ember Day. There are 3 of them. They don't come quite in a row. There's an Ember Day, skip, and then there's 2 more Ember Days. That Ember Day is in Leo. And Sandy, I bet you can tell us what we don't do in Leo.
You're not going to do a lot of planning in Leo. you can maybe destroying.
Yeah, Leo is called the killing sign. And that's the time to cut things that you want dead. Never trim a tree in Leo unless you want it to die. That's one of the sayings. So I wouldn't be planning on that day anyway. The next Ember Day is on February 23rd. The signs are in the bowels or Virgo, which is a barren day, kind of good for vines. I remember that, Virgos and vines, but not really for crops. So I probably wouldn't plant on that day anyway. And then the next Ember Day, which is February 24th, that's a full moon day. And again, the signs are in Virgo. So that's really 3 strikes. So one of the warnings is don't plant when the moon changes phases. And the moon, when it's full, I mean, it has all kind of energy. Now, if you can plant right before a full moon, that's fabulous.
That's the great time. But we can't here, right? Because the 23rd is an Ember Day.
Yeah.
That's tricky.
So, Ember Days, when they come around in June, and everybody's planting, we all just, or let me own this part. I'll just do like my kids just say, we're going to forget about that rule today, Mama. But definitely on the full moon day and on the day that's the killing sign, I wouldn't be planting anyway.
So then we're kind of safe on the 24th there. So the Ember Days has so much religion, I know, and we said folklore. I know that it also depends, like back in the very olden times with Appalachians, they followed those Ember Days so they knew they could have a better crop. This was, and I want everybody to kind of think about this too. As we talk about planting by the signs, we're talking about taking something that is from our ancestors and bringing it to current times in practice, putting it in practice. But I want you to pause for a second and think about the past. These people, our ancestors, lived and died by their crops. Now we can go to the grocery store. We got a job and we can go to the grocery. Crops were very, very important to them. So they believed these signs. They knew if they planted during a certain time and they followed the Ember signs, they could have good crops.
Yes. And I remember seeing pictures of, I call them my old picture file, and people are so thin. Yeah. And I asked my dad once, I said, why are y'all so skinny?
Yeah.
And he said, because we had to work hard just to get something to eat.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's important that sentence just is really out there because, like I said, we go to the grocery store. Well, we go to work, we have jobs, we have internet, we have all these things that our ancestors didn't have. And they're kids, little kids. I mean, my mom will tell you stories, little kids out there in the fields working. And I want to point out that they're using this calendar and they've got short time frames to plant, right? They only have a couple of days to get a massive amount of crops.
Yeah. And if you'll go to the signs about what is a dark moon, we'll talk a little bit about, or I think it says something about dark moon, light moon, because that's the first concept. That's the first thing I do when I turn the page of my calendar is to find the new moon, because I want to know the first step, find what the moon phases are. I want to know my dark moons and my light moons. And it's after you look at the calendar, you can immediately see it after you've looked at it for a while. I used to put all kind of little notes all over mine. Now I do them in pencil instead of bright red, big X's by the killing sign of Leo in the heart. But now I look for the small, little blackened face. Let me see. I can hold this up to see this little face. Are you seeing it?
The black symbols?
Yeah, the little symbols. The completely blackened face is the new moon.
Okay.
The clear face with a circle around it
Uh-huh.
is the full moon. So you know immediately that that's your anything you want to plant, that the part you eat is above the ground, that's when you plant it. That's the moon phase there. So you pay attention to that. Well, February, in fact, all of this year, the every month until we get to December starts and ends with the dark moon in force. Isn't that a great turn of phrase?
Interesting.
Dark moon
is
in force. So every month of this year, except for December, starts and ends with a waning moon. You might hear a descending moon. You might hear dark of the moon or just dark moon in force. I love that. Or
and then tell us what we should do with that.
So that is the signal for planting root crops. Anything that you eat the part that's below the ground. Potatoes is what we'll be looking at in March. Some people plant their potatoes in February, but I could never do that, even in North Georgia.
Yeah.
Foxfire says to plant potatoes on a dark night in March. And Foxfire is my little gospel, so I stick to that. So the dark moon, those are anything that you want to decrease. Let's suppose you're tired of getting your hair cut because you go all the time to get your hair cut and you want to stay short. One of the theories is you go and get your hair cut on a decreasing moon.
So if I get my hair cut in the decreasing moon, it'll stay shorter longer?
That's the idea. Now, I have a friend who drives from North Georgia to Hanging Dog, North Carolina. That's a couple of hours to get her hair cut, but she wants it in an increasing moon. And she looks for the sign of Libra. Libra is all things beauty, all things flowers. We'll talk a lot about Libra this time. February is a great flower month, by the way. So do you think about, do you want things to increase or do you want it to decrease? If you're pruning, do you want to prune to discourage growth or prune to encourage growth?
Interesting.
That would tell you the phases of the moon. The dark of the moon, dark decrease. That's how I remember it. And then I remember that light is increasing. Now, some people stop right there. When they say planting by the moon, they are really just looking at the phases of the moon.
And they don't go any further for the
They're
sign.
they're not layering in the signs of the zodiac. Sandy, do you have the slide of the Zodiac Man?
I should. Give me a second while I bring that up. And so it's interesting, too, that we're talking about gardening and planting by the signs, but we're bringing in other tasks. And these tasks were done by the individuals. Your friend travels to get her hair done, but on the farm, it was one-stop shopping.
Oh, yeah.
Your
grandma probably cut your hair.
Yeah. You did pretty much everything there. Let me see if I can find the Zodiac Man. And what could you remind us what the Zodiac Man is?
So the Zodiac Man is an icon that's left over from right after the time or probably it was here before printing press, but it got turned into an icon in those first woodcuts, in those first almanacs that were coming out. And in the Middle Ages, it was a way that doctors could figure out what sign ruled which part. So if they were bleeding someone, they would not bleed. If the signs were in the head, you'll see the stand. There's a head to the feet, and each body part is labeled with the sign Leo. Let's take head. The sign Aries, the icon Aries. Remember, a lot of folks couldn't read. So they're looking at things symbolically. They see a head or they see a ram, and they know that's one of the killing signs. They know that's the sign that you don't go to the dentist in because you'll bleed like a stuck pig. Direct quote from one of the first Foxfire students who worked on that article. She's,
Really?
50
Don't
years
go
ago.
to the dentist.
When the signs are in the head, or you'll bleed like a stuck
See, and you
pig.
would kind of think that that would be almost different backwards, because you would think, okay, the head, that would be a time to do with anything that's going on up here. So don't go to the dentist.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying if you have an emergency, go to the dentist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please go to the dentist. This is not medical
Yes.
advice. When they called me and said, we have a liver for you, I
know.
have to be honest and say I did not check the signs.
And I'm glad you did not check the signs. Okay, so here's our
Yes.
man,
So
and I'm
that's
just gonna blow it up a little bit
sure,
more
sure.
so everybody can see your markings on it. There we go.
So another thing that's happening in February is you might hear someone say, we're having more days to make changes. And I would say, when do you make a change? What do you mean by change? And they'd say, well, stop smoking, but most importantly, weaning a baby, weaning a calf. When are the best times to wean them? And they would say, well, you want to wean them on a dark moon. So we know that's in the waning period. But they would say, when the signs are going out of the body. And I thought, that's just the weirdest thing I've ever
I
heard.
know.
Going out of the body.
Like,
now, they didn't say when the signs, so you can see this man, and I'd say, going out of the body, how? And of anything that matters. So apparently when you get below your bowels and loins, nothing else matters. But when you
the
get
brain, we're worried about the brain and the
when
heart.
you get to your thighs and your knees, and then on down into ankles and feet, that is supposed to be the time that it's easier to make a change, and particularly when it comes to weaning animals. There's a lot. I have been looking in folklore books from North Carolina that were written or assembled in the 40s. They were collected many years before that. There's a lot written there about when to do things to animals. Things we never think of doing things to animals now. We go to our vet. If we do have a farm, we probably have a farm vet. But, in the times we're talking about, you were a little bit of everything on your farm. So this is related to another point I want to make, is your calendar will not say Leo. Your calendar will not say Aries or Pisces. Nowhere on your calendar is that written. On your calendar, you will see a tiny little icon of a lion for Leo, or a tiny little icon of a fish, or a ram for the head, and fish for the feet, which is Pisces. So that's why this calendar can be confusing, because you look at those little icons,
You can.
and the feet, the bowels. I love what sometimes different calendars call Scorpio. Sometimes they'll call them the privates. But, that's just a little too private.
Private.
So sometimes I've heard people say the secrets.
The secrets.
In North Georgia, I hear when the signs are in the secrets. That's one of the.
See, I've heard the privates before, and it's funny because I have seen my grandfather, for example, will say it quick but slow in a way. I don't know how to explain it, and then he's gone. He left that nugget of wisdom, and he's gone, and he's not going to explain it any further.
That's right. My calendar calls it the loins, which to me is a little more lascivious than secrets.
Secrets.
So, and that's why different things are there's different words. So sometimes the words that we say, oh, I don't know, what is this? You'll hear like Virgo, the bowels, that is represented by a virgin, and they say in the mountains, they say the posy girl. They call her the posy girl. So part of it is highly, almost hyper local.
It really is, and it's very extreme culture where I'm just going to say it, where your hollers are, because back then you did not tend to travel too far, so you have your pockets of that culture. I still am fascinated. I hope that during this web series we can get somebody from the Appalachian areas of New York and Pennsylvania to come in, because those are two areas that I don't talk enough about. And I know they have different phrases.
I do too. I went to a conference there several years ago, and I loved it. I felt so at home. I thought, this is home.
Yeah.
This looks like home. This
Isn't
feels
it
like home.
interesting how we're in southern Appalachia, and then you travel to northern Appalachia, which is going to be your extremes of Appalachia here, and you still felt like home. The
Yes.
people, the culture, the views. You still there's just something special about Appalachians, but that's another show.
Yeah,
we'll
it sure is. We could talk about
Okay, so
it.
tell us what we should do for February. What is our goals for February? If
So
I'm planting.
in February, when I was pulling this together, I thought about the themes that stood out to me was this one. You have 8 days to make a change.
Yeah.
Last month, we only had 7, and fewer and fewer and fewer. So if you put off your New Year's resolutions like I did, I think I'm going to start them this month. So I would pay attention to any kind of changes you need to make, or I would also pay attention to flowers, because February is a lovely month for flowers. And I think I wrote about this on my Instagram.
Let's see. Let's bring that up. Give me a
Yeah.
second. When you mentioned flowers a few moments ago, you got my attention. I am all into the flower garden. So let's see your advice for the flowers, and which particular.
So it's the pink one. It's the pink one there.
That makes sense. There we go.
So if you're like me and you're out walking and you see some daffodils, you're gonna pick some. Hopefully not too many. But the time to pick flowers are in a watery or an earthy sign. And the watery signs are Scorpio, those loins and secrets that we talked about. Cancer, you'll see that as a crab, or you hear it called the breast. And also fishes, the feet, Pisces. So those are great days if you're making a bouquet, if you have a cut flower garden, or particularly later on in the season when you are cutting from your garden. Earth signs are also great, and this is what you can do with Virgo. Virgo is it's an earthy sign, and it's good to pick flowers in. Also, Taurus, you'll see a bull, or you'll say the neck, strong as a bull's neck. That's how I remember that. Taurus is a good sign as well. And good old Capricorn, the goat, is just a workhorse of a sign that doesn't get enough attention, I think. So when those days, any watery sign or earthy sign, and how are you going to remember those signs? Well, on the back of your calendar. First of all, before you get a calendar, check the back of it to make sure it's gotten the rules written down, because what rules we have are written on the back of this calendar. And I compared them with calendars I found from 50 years ago. They're the same rules.
And they're the same. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I need to pause for just a second. So a good friend of mine, Irish John, is in the audience. And I think that we might need to discuss this briefly every webcast for those that come in and don't know. He doesn't believe in zodiac signs. So John and I are very similar, similar upbringings. I'm going to guess John's same. I was not allowed to read, horoscopes and things like that. So when we're talking about the zodiac signs, we're not really talking about astrology here. And that's kind of the big lightning moment I had with Rosann very beginning of this. It's not necessarily astrology based, correct? like a horoscope. Excuse me. Let me rephrase. It's
It's
not
certainly
horoscope.
not, it's not horoscopic astrology.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there were many types of astrology until I studied for 2 years Hellenistic astrology, which is from the Greek and Roman period, because I wanted to try to go as far back as I could and see how people were using the moon, lunar planting. So horoscopic is when sometimes you're in a big round circle, you have a sun sign, a moon sign, a rising sign. You have a lot of planets in such and such a house, and you'll probably have a bunch of kids.
Yeah,
So
and I think
this
John
is
makes
not
a
that.
statement with that. Yeah, we're not when you mention zodiac signs, these are zodiac signs, but and let me correct myself again. This isn't a horoscope type of thing. I think this is just a practice of looking at the moon and the signs to determine after decades, centuries of what works for planting versus let's go ahead and get our horoscope up today and read it today, read it tomorrow, read it the next.
Yeah. Your horoscope does not inform this calendar, this system at all, and this system would also not inform your interest or disinterest in a natal horoscope. If I had to pick a type of astrology to classify it as, it would be called electional. When do I want to elect to do something?
Mhm.
But if you go in and study electional astrology, it's what is Saturn doing? What angle is the planet making to another planet? This is not that either. So I would call it a remnant of electional astrology that got pulled in somehow to a folk practice. And I think it was the practice of being outside and watching the sun and the moon. John, that is the question. Where and how did it start? The further I go back, the more I still find it. So it is astrology. It is certainly not natal astrology, but I can tell you that every single person I've spoken with who practices this as an authentic, learned folk practice, the word astrology would not leave a lip.
Yeah,
No,
never.
no,
And I can tell you
no.
from my grandparents and beyond, it would never. And I will guarantee you that my mom would never have practiced this as well because we were raised to not really read horoscopes and things like that. But I do want to point out one other thing. This show is called Ember Days. And Ember Days, it's a religious holiday. So keep that in mind too. So I think some people get nervous with planning by the signs and think that we're talking about other cultures that maybe don't practice some religion. I'm not really sure if religion has a place in or out of planting of the signs because I think they just followed the moon and the signs and they knew the weather. To me, planning by the signs is more trying to predict the weather than anything else. That's
And
coming.
yeah, and the weather part of the almanac,
Yeah.
that's my goal for this year is to study that more because there's whole practice around predicting weather as well. Two things. I have often thought that the reason there's no zodiac signs on this calendar,
Mhm.
you won't see the little icons, you won't see the word Aries, you will see the head and the ram. I believe that's part of it. I believe that's part
I
of
think
this
so.
because people will say, "Oh, it's a good time plant in the feet. Don't plant
Mhm.
in the bowels. Don't go to the dentist in the head." I have often thought, should I start using those words instead of words like feet, instead of words like Pisces for feet, because the Appalachian way of saying it that
Mhm.
I learned from in North Georgia. I always qualify that, John, because how I learn it here is what it would be very different in West Virginia. Um, and I also think that planning by the signs does have to do with religious practices, but maybe not in the way we think. on every, or certainly not the way when my students started doing this 6 years ago. We ask ourselves, well, why are they
Yeah.
saying that? I mean, this is a pickup line at the bar. No, no. Well, we were asking the wrong questions, and we were using a method of narrative inquiry where we listen to the story and we look at the story and we see what they say about it, not what we think they should say about it. And we saw over and over and over again scripture from Ecclesiastes. People saying, well, why did God put the moon in the sky if he didn't mean for us to plant by it? From a population of predominantly conservative Protestants. This was the Foxfire population, and this was the living population. Certainly not every one of them, but as a whole. So it wasn't just I believe in astrology and I'm going to go look at my horoscope. It was more that God was in the heaven and God was in control. And these were certain days that he'd set aside for certain things. And so they were going to follow it. So for them, it reinforced their belief. So folk practice,
especially when it reinforced that faith system when the crops did perform the way they were expected. So I think I'm just going to maybe say that planning by the signs, I think so many people come in to this program with different thoughts. And I think people practice it with different beliefs.
Certainly.
I think that's the only way we can define it. And I think that we learn from all of you which way and how you practice it by which belief. Or maybe you are very religious and that's your core. Or maybe you do follow more astrology in the moon and that's how you plant your garden. So I just want to point that out, that I'm glad that he brought it up because I think this is an important topic to get out before we start digging into the monthlies and the act of gardening.
Yeah, that's such a strong point. I mean, that was what our whole 5 years of research was about, that we had to redo our question. Our question was, how can conservative conservative Protestants believe in the zodiac?
Because
that was a wrong question.
It was. Amazing, because that would have been my first question too. And so it's amazing that you and your students came up with that. Thank you, John, for bringing it up. And John's in Ireland. So the potatoes probably make more sense to him over there than they do to us here.
Yeah, I would love to hear if anybody there plants by the signs or just plants by the moon.
We'll see if we can convince them.
That divided out sometimes into two. I do want to say about February as we're winding down, with exception of the Ember Days, but they're not really wasted because they're in some either so-so signs, or they're either in a killing sign, or they're either when the moon changes phases. February is a great month. I wish we could have this month in June. You got 2 times to plant your underground crops, and you got 2 times to plant you've got 1 time a good long stretch, and right in the middle is Cancer, a sweet sign. A sweet. If you can't do anything else, plant under the sign of the crab.
And then we begin the next month. The very first day, as you said, we're starting with a dark. So those are the last day of February and the first day of March are good planting days for us.
Well, if you're going to lay down, it depends on, some people say don't plant at all in the 4th quarter. That last week running up to the new moon, they say that's the time to rest. But honestly, I if I didn't plant every time I was told not to plant, I'd never plant.
I was going to say, it's tough because what happens if it's a rainy month where you're at and that's the only sunny week?
Yes.
So I guess you got to take that into account too.
I think that the part of it is that if you go out in your garden and do everything according to the signs, you're still going out in your garden and you're doing
Yeah,
stuff
I
and you're
love that.
watching it. I kind of think that's why the gardens are great, because it's a task for every day.
There really is.
There's a
Yeah,
task for every day, and you're watching your garden. You're observing. You know when certain insects come out. You know that if you nip them in the bud now, maybe that bud's nip in the bud. That's a good talk about pruning. If you do it in a waning time, well, you've done it, and it just happened to be in a waning sign, but you had a memory prompt to do it.
to do that. But don't cut your hydrangeas if you're in the South. Please don't do that yet. Your old hydrangeas, please leave them alone. That's where my son will go and cut the hydrangeas or play with them and snap them.
Yeah,
And then I
and
have done.
that's the wood. That's the wood that they grow on.
Yes.
I did see somebody write about not cutting in a watery sign. I did a lot of research on that this morning, because I have been taught that you do not harvest vegetables. Never harvest a vegetable in a water sign. You always look for the barren signs or a fiery sign for that. You don't want that water. But I went back to where I read it, and I can post the source. I want to say it was like 1907 Lyman Stowe, who wrote a lot about the moon. He certainly said it. So to hedge my bets on clipping in a watery sign, I would say do it on a waning moon. So harvesting vegetables, which, Sandy, I'm learning about flower growing. I grew vegetables at our demonstration garden. We grew out the seeds that we collected, and most of them were vegetable seeds. So yeah, I'll be glad to post that in the comments, what he said about it. But I like what Phil Case, how he does it on his Facebook. He says, this is what I learned. This is what I was told. This is what I think about it. But in the end, you have to decide for yourself.
You really do. And I like to see results.
Yes.
Sometimes they're not pretty, and that's okay too. Sometimes they're beautiful, and sometimes they're not pretty. So it's interesting because I do more of the flowers than vegetables. So I love this combination that you and I have. So we'll be able to
that's a good
share
one.
back and forth. And I think that if anybody has any questions, let us know. We're kind of winding down this broadcast. We will be back at the beginning of March to talk about March, because every month we'll have different things to talk about. And I'm so excited.
And I front loaded my Instagram this month. If you go there, there's a lot of dates and a lot where I dive a little bit deeper into everyone. So.
And the cards that you're seeing on the screen are so great. Rosann gives you a lot of details with them. And her Instagram is down below in the description. I just want to point out, because we are talking about Appalachians a little bit, and this kind of is an Appalachian area. They did migrate, but this particular planting by the signs practice is very popular by the Pennsylvania Dutch. And we don't talk about them as much because they kind of are on the border of our Pennsylvania Dutch with Appalachia. But I just wanted to give you a couple things that they truly believed in. So they believe that persons born on Ember Days can see ghosts. The grain will be high in price if the Ember Days come late in the month. And rain on Ember Day is followed by 3 weeks of rain. So, Rosann, I'm going to see if you will take that task on to see if that's true.
I sure will. I have this spreadsheet that is, it's so long. I wonder how much longer my computer can hold it. And for every day and sign, I have that. I'll type that in, and we will watch it and see what happens.
And I have one more, and this was funny because as I was preparing for the Ember Days, I was sharing this with my husband, because, as I said, he's out in the garden, the vegetable part of the garden, a lot more than I am. I just am not successful as I am with the flowers. And he had a question about this, the last one, and it goes, washing on Ember Day is unlucky. So as a woman, and I'm sorry to say this, but as a woman, I took it to mean washing my laundry. As a man, he took it, does that mean I don't get a shower on that day? So I don't know.
You know, I have never heard any of these. I've never heard a single thing. So, y'all write us and let us know
Yes,
if you do it a different way. That's okay. We're not. It's not.
that
We're not
is.
going to
And
argue with you
definitely
about it.
come
We
back
want to
in the
learn.
next, yeah, come back the next month and tell us, did you see those 3 weeks of rain? Because I'm really, really curious what it is. And
Mhm.
thanks, Rosann, again from Moon and
Thank
Mountain
you.
Lore.
Thank
We
you,
will see
everybody.
you guys every month. Have a good one.
Bye
Bye.
bye.